During the table topics portion of our meeting 3 weeks ago, ATM bronze David Goldwich mentioned that he had published a few books. A number of people asked him about it after the meeting, so tonight he will share more in his 10 to 12 minute speech, How to Write a Book. Please help me welcome writer David Goldwich.
Move the table over here.
Oh, okay.
How many of you have ever written a book? One. How many of you have ever read a book? Full house. How many of you have ever thought, I think I might want to write a book sometime? All right, that's my market. When I moved to Singapore in December of 1999, all the way in the last millennium, I was struck by how different the place was. The culture, the lifestyle, the people. It was quite a culture shock. So I started writing these humorous essays that I would email to my friends and relatives describing my experiences, and they all said the same thing: you should write a book. So I accumulated a number of essays over several years and ultimately published my second book, which is this, a book of humorous essays about life in Singapore as an expat. And I had a cartoonist who's very well known in Singapore do the cover for me. You might think that would be very expensive. It wasn't. All I had to do was make a moderate, I wouldn't say small, but moderate donation to his favorite charity. And everybody in Singapore recognizes that style. I thought it would be nice to have my face photographically reproduced on a cartoon body, because back in the 90s, there was this very famous ad campaign for Tanqueray Gin with a Mr. Jenkins character. I thought that was pretty cool. So this was my second book, because it took a while to write all those essays. My first book was a collection of all of my corporate training programs in communications. And it's called Why Did the Chicken Cross the Road? Also a very cartoony character with a real face on it. I think I paid $50 to some starving artist to do this. Very amateurish. It even says, by David Goldwich. You don't put that on a book cover. You don't say, by Stephen King or by John Grisham. But it was my first one. I was learning. And the title, Why Did the Chicken Cross the Road? We hear that joke all the time. There's a million answers. How do we know what the right answer is? You have to ask the chicken, which means you have to ask questions and listen and build rapport and read body language and use all of the communication skills that are contained in the book. So this was the first. The third one was very different. I had a colleague who wrote a lot of business books, and she was putting together a series that was going to be published by a real publisher, Marshall Cavendish out of the UK. And she asked me to do the negotiation book. I didn't get to use my photograph on a cartoon body. They gave me these little figures, I'm not sure what even to call them, because all the covers were standard, just a different color, different title. But this was a challenge, because when you write for a publisher, you have a deadline. So I had to get on a schedule. Every day from 8 till noon, I was writing before I even opened my email, before I took a bite of food, before I could exercise, just to make sure the book got done. Not only do you have to keep to the timing and the outline, you have to follow all of their requirements. I think I may have mentioned before, I don't really like a lot of rules. There's a lot of rules involved in this. For example, there has to be exactly 10 chapters. You can't have 9, you can't have 12. At the end of every chapter, you have to have exactly 10 takeaway points. Not 9, not 11. And there were a couple of cartoons in each chapter, a few other aha moment features and other sidebars. I'm pretty happy with it, but I don't like all those rules. So after 10 years, because these business series only have a 10-year shelf life, that's a pun, shelf life.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, you guys are incorrigible. Okay, so after 10 years, they approached me and said, would you like to release it as a standalone book? So I thought, all I have to do is update it. Nothing really new has happened in the negotiation space in the last 10 years. How hard can it be? Well, it's about as hard as writing a book from scratch, because you still have to revise it, even though it's about 80% the same as the original. I wanted to do it differently. There are not 10 chapters, there are 8. And they're not all the same length because some are more important than others. And they have takeaway points at the end, but there's not always 10. Some have more than others. I got rid of all the other features, and the only sidebars are my own little stories. I told you the one about how I got the pick at the Cheap Trick concert. That's in there. Another story about how I was attacked by pirates while cruising the Caribbean. You don't know that story yet. I'll have to tell you sometime. And I get to use my own voice. It doesn't have to sound corporate. So this one was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. And they were translated officially into Chinese and Vietnamese, and unofficially into this notorious Farsi edition. So during that 10-year period, I was still busy. I wanted to do a book on presentation skills, because most of the books on presentations in Singapore are written by Toastmasters. And they all talk about the Toastmasters approach. You have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You have to tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And a message is only 7% the words, and so on and so on. I don't believe in most of that stuff. So I took my unconventional approach, did it my way. Had somebody, I think I paid $100 for this book cover, somebody in Ukraine, because they're just as talented there. They just have a much lower cost of living, so they can get good quality work for cheap. And a lot of people used to ask me, is that you? Like I can do that.
Well, at least you could impose your face in there.
But now they don't even ask anymore. That's so sad. Pobrecito. So that was fun. And then my editor friend, who put the book series together, had an idea for a couple of other collections. So this has 365 tips. You keep it by your bed every night, you read one, and then you become a brilliant manager by the end of the year. And they asked me to do a section of this. And then this is a similar book with a bunch of my colleagues, and I got to do a section of this also. And then that same publisher said, we're going to put together a book about expat life, and they asked me to do an essay. Most of the people in here are not writers, and they're not very funny. Most of them aren't even very well known in Singapore, except for the Australian CEO of a big furniture company, but he's not very funny. So I wrote 2 essays. Everybody else wrote 1. Why? Because I had 2 ideas that I wanted to do, and I asked. If you want something, you have to ask for it. If you don't ask, you don't get. So that's a lesson. I'm not sure anybody actually read this. I know my mom did. I think my daughter did. So what's next? I swore I would never write another book. You don't make money. It's a lot of work. And once you have the credibility of a few books, you don't really need to do more. But, man makes his plans and the gods laugh. So just last week I wrote another book. I'm building a website. I need kind of a giveaway to get people to give me their contact info. And usually you give them some sort of written thing. I gathered all of my old blog posts and newsletter articles, found I had 30,000 words, which is a whole book in itself. I thought that's too much. I just took out the negotiation articles. That came about to 10,000. Did my own little cover, and it's a book. And I'm going to get a couple of other ebooks out of that. Then I've got a friend, I won't mention his name, but his initials are AI. And the pronoun is it. So I gave it an outline of a storytelling book, and it gave me a few pages of a draft. That's all it would give me. I guess you have to pay for the upgraded to get more. So I thought, let me give it each chapter and ask it to elaborate. So now I've got more. I haven't really read it yet. I'm not sure I like it, but it's a starting point. So that'll be my next book. So what about you guys? You ready to write a book? Lots of ways to do it, but don't just write it because you think you're going to change the world. The ancient Greeks said there is nothing new under the sun. It was true then, it's true now. But if you can put your own take on it, or take the content and repackage it in a way that's appealing, then it might be worth doing. I had another colleague named Dan Pointer, an older gentleman who died a couple of years ago, and his business was helping people write books. He wrote a bunch of books on his own, one about parachuting, one about cats, and one about parachuting cats. And he used to say, nobody should ever die with a book still inside them. I disagree with that. I think a lot of books should never be written. But if you do have a great idea and you think it's worth putting out there into the world, go for it. Unlike Dan, I don't charge. I'd be happy to give anybody a little bit of advice if you want to take that on. So happy writing. Toastmaster of the evening.